back to another edition of Civil Discussion on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project and one of the co-hosts of the show. Glad to have my colleague and co-host Don Keelan here with us today, as well as our special guest, John O'Keefe. And we're going to be talking today about civil discourse and housing. But of course, along the way, last weekend, to be precise, a little bit of news erupted in the meanwhile. We were looking forward to having John on the program, and then we found out that John's going to be leaving as the town manager of Manchester after, what is it now, 15 and a half years? January of 2007 to the present. Mm-hmm. I can say that I remember the time when I was waiting in the Kilburn meeting room there to be introduced to John at a press conference that was being held. It's still a vivid recollection of that. It's funny how you remember some of these things. But anyway, John, of course, has been the town manager for a very long time, not quite as long as Jeff Wilson, I don't believe, who was there for, I think, one more year. Why didn't you stay one more year to beat his record? You know? Well,
I guess the first thing is I think that Jeff's record needs to have an asterisk next to it, just like Roger Maris. He didn't serve in the days of cell phones and email and social media, so I feel like maybe I've nudged Jeff out of the top. But joking aside, now is the right time, and I think that it's a really important process in our government, whether you're appointed or elected. The transition of government, we sort of saw that. The importance of that, and I just kind of felt like for me and for my family, this was the right time and the right opportunity. And even if you look at it in terms of the calendar year, not the number of years that you serve, the calendar year, now is the perfect time. It's right at the end of the summer. The budget process hasn't started. The town meeting isn't here, and we have in place a really good team that can do that. But I felt like it kind of brings me back to a story that Ivan tells, that when Harry Henderson left, which was a much different day and age. This was the 1980s, so the town government had a lot less employees. It had a lot less function. Harry came into the select board meeting and said he was leaving. That was number one. Number two, it was late in the year, and he hadn't started the budget. And number three, the police department was unionizing. Those are the three things that he dropped on him. And so I feel like when I had the discussion with the select board, things were in really good shape. Certainly the difference now, too, is that we had a real clear number two person in the organization that dealt with a lot of the stuff. One of the key things you have to do in town government is pay your employees and your vendors. If you don't do that, people tend to stop showing up and stop working for you, whether they're vendors or employees. So
it's funny how that works.
It is funny how that works, yeah. By the way, I assume I'm getting paid twice as much because of this story about Williams for my appearance today, right?
Right.
Because it's twice the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So I'll double my fee.
Both are nonprofits, aren't they?
Yes.
So what are you going to be doing at Williams College? That's where you're going to next. I think, August 26th is your last day at the town office in Manchester. And what's the new job going to involve?
When I was looking at, when I was thinking about different opportunities, the one thing I didn't want to do is go work for the state. I've already worked for state government. I didn't want to work for another municipality. I felt like that would kind of be a step backwards. The experience in Manchester has been so great. That I felt like any place I would have gone would have been just a huge disappointment. And then I started thinking about, what did I enjoy the most? Obviously, it's all interesting, even the water and sewer and the highway stuff. Water and sewer is more exciting than it sounds. But one thing that I really kind of enjoyed was the development of a sports and recreation economy in Manchester. And so at Williams, I'll be the associate athletic director for the athletic department for budget and finance.
Okay.
And
let me back up just a moment. Why the notice? I mean, you were giving us a little background earlier, but for someone who's been there for almost 16 years, people have asked me, why just a couple of weeks' notice? He's gone from town manager to now the assistant athletic director. Why the short notice?
Well, a couple of reasons. One, right now the break in the Manchester schedule is pretty clear. It's a kind of a slow time of year for us. A real clear number two, in the cycle, where I'm going, the college cycle is starting up again. Students are coming back on campus, so it just seemed like the most natural break. Usually it's more, well, actually a lot of town managers leave in the middle of the night, by the way. but that's a different story. Yes. Or they're run out of town on a rail, tarred and feathered. This wasn't that case, thankfully. And the other thing is I'm sticking around in town, so I've told the select board and Leslie Parra, who's going to be appointed interim, that I'm totally available.
Would you?
So I don't want to be the guy that doesn't go away. So I'm being kind of careful about not butting my nose in after I'm gone. But I told him that I'm available to help in any way possible.
Will you be leaving the area? And did the select board try to keep you here and not have you leave us?
I think they were really. I think they were kind of surprised. I think they were disappointed, but I think they also know that 16 years. This is the kind of job that after 16 years it is tiring. You don't really get vacations at all. I don't think I've had a vacation in probably 12 years, like a real one where something doesn't happen. What was the first part of your question?
Are you leaving the area?
Oh no, I'm not leaving the area. I'm going to continue to live in Manchester. I think Manchester. I've lived in a lot of different places. We both lived in Ireland, for example. I didn't realize that. Manchester's the greatest town I've ever lived in.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I'm sticking here. My daughter's also a rising junior at Burton. Mm-hmm. Even if my wife and I moved away, I think she'd still stay somehow. I'm not sure how it is. She's incredibly happy there. And so, I'm going to be commuting. It's probably about 40 minutes. It's not bad. I know that sounds like a lot, but when you think of what other people are commuting, even if you go over to Albany, a 40-minute commute is 20 miles on the Northway.
Well, I'm sure they're going to be tapping you if the select board now knows that you're staying in town.
Yes.
Yeah. Rest assured, you're going to be. And will they be doing a search?
They'll be doing a search, and that's the other question that people ask me is, well, why not stay until the new person's named? That could be a long time, and actually, we're going to get into a discussion here soon about one of the reasons it may be tough to recruit somebody.
Yes.
That when it seems like a great position. It is. It's a terrific board. It's a terrific community. But moving here from far away can be a little bit of a sticker shock when it comes to housing.
Mm-hmm. What stands out in your mind if you look back over the past 15 years as to what happened? I mean, thinking the roundabout, getting that done, the improvements to the rec park probably, or another area that really, when you think back, what were some of the big accomplishments?
I'd say the roundabout. I was telling this story the other night that one of the things that when I interviewed here back in 2006, I guess November and December of 2006, one of the discussions that became obvious is that the board really wanted to move the roundabout forward. It had been stalled for
20 years.
20 years, and we just couldn't seem to get over the hump. And I think that was a big psychological barrier too, that we had talked about it for so long that it seemed like there was a feeling that we couldn't get stuff done. So that was the one thing that they said, listen, this is one of the first things we want to get done. And we did the contract openings. Schultz from over in New York State won the bid. And when we signed the contract, there were a lot of skeptics. And that night, I went to bed. I didn't go to bed. I didn't sleep. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep. And I thought, oh my God, I've ruined Manchester. Everybody has. Yeah. Everybody has doubts.
When I look back at a lot of the accomplishments you've had, I would have to say how you got through Irene, the tropical storm Irene, and how you got through COVID. That's not in the playbook for a town manager.
No.
Building roundabouts, it's a construction project and all that. And it did take quite a complexity. But COVID and Irene were dumped on you.
And those
came your way.
Those are two things that, you just, and I think that's one reason that you are seeing some turnover in the business as well, is that, especially after Irene, there were a lot of emergency managers in smaller communities that just said, hey, listen, I didn't sign up for this, and they quit. They just couldn't handle it. It was something that, as a municipal official, you don't expect that. In Manchester, we fared pretty well. We were well prepared. We did a lot of stuff in the days leading up to it that some people thought was overreacting. Turns out we probably underreacted, if anything. But some of these towns, like Rochester, had their entire cemetery just blown right off the map. Bits and pieces all over the place. I mean, just catastrophic damage. And I think that we fared pretty well, but it was still a stressful time. Funny thing about that is when FEMA showed up, they are used to working in states where everyone just sits around and waits for FEMA to show up. So as we were touring the town several days later, there were people out filling in holes. putting roads back together, and they were kind of surprised. They were kind of taken back by the Vermont mentality that, you don't wait around for somebody to fix your road. If you've got a backhoe, you go out there and fill it in.
The fact that you were a major proponent, I believe you were, of the field house, and it got turned down.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm mistaken. Was it turned down in Manchester?
Yeah, by about it's a very small, very small number.
Was that a disappointment to you, and did that accelerate your decision to go to Williams?
It's interesting. No, it didn't. I thought it was a good project. I think it was the multi-town approach to it has always been really hard to do in this area. For some reason, we still operate in these boxes that were drawn by the King of England back in the 1700s. Andrew's from Sunderland. We can't even talk to each other. He lives in a foreign land.
And he's on the select board. We can bring that out, right?
Yes, Sunderland actually voted in favor of it. Right? No, lost by one vote.
Right.
Lost by one vote.
Yeah.
I thought it was a good I did think it was a little big for Manchester. I was more in favor of a Manchester specific project and allowing other communities to use it. We would have definitely gotten into some challenges as far as governance. One thing that we talked about early on is you can't really say, oh, here's the field house and it's a regional asset, but the septic system's owned by the town of Manchester, which we're going to use. And how do you sort of take that into account? The water system is the town's system. The parking is the town's parking. I was hoping it would pass the advisory vote, but I think that it probably would have come out differently in the end if the project actually went ahead, in the end for bonding.
If you had your way, because about getting towns to work better together, Dorset's been a good example.
Yep.
And then more recently you had the issue with the rescue squad and working with the towns, and then you had the rec park working with Dorset.
Yep.
Why isn't, from your perspective, towns? Why can't they work closer together? Because in Arlington, we're trying to get the, and God forbid you bring it up, get the fire and rescue to possibly think about regionalization. I'm not suggesting that they do it, but at least look into it. Does it make sense to regionalize the ambulance service, the rescue service, and to regionalize fire? Because there's so much equipment in this county. Tremendous amount of it. And as you know, it's not, I don't know about Manchester, who owns the equipment, but it's not cheap.
No, it's not.
By any means. And we just spent $700,000 on a truck in Arlington. And you ask yourself, how long can you continue this? Not so bad.
Our units of government, Manchester is the big 500-pound gorilla, and it's 4,400 people. If you took that across the border to where Andrew and I grew up in New York, it would be, even a city of 12,000 people in New York is a speck on the map. We're 4,400 people. Arlington is about half of that. Dorset's about half of that. Sunderland, do you guys have 1,000 people yet?
Yes.
Oh.
We crossed that over last year.
Nice. Okay.
1,056.
Oh.
If I research correctly.
And it's probably higher. All of our communities are probably higher now than the number shows. But I think the regionalization, we've tried different things over the years, like collective purchasing. And there's not a real strong, at the county level, there's only the court system, which doesn't do anything administratively. There's Bennington Regional Commission and then the Sheriff's Department. That's it. And when you look at when you look at areas that have been able to do a lot of regionalization, it's usually done at the county level, like in New York, all the emergency management. Doing emergency management at the local level seems kind of silly because the rivers in Dorset all end up in Manchester. And the ones in Manchester all end up in Arlington.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
You've got roads that go from one community to the next. But in New England, there's always been a distrust of county government. And I think that's something that's going to hold it up. But I think that if people are looking for efficiencies and looking to redevelop, more regionalization is going to be important. I do wish that the state I was on the State Board of Ed when we were going through Act 46, which was a ton of fun. And I do wish the state would have like an Act 46 process, or at least offer some incentives to municipalities to do things like intergovernmental agreements, or even I know it's radical, but in other areas, Andrew's originally from New York City. New York City, kept annexing properties. Brooklyn used to be its own town, right? Or village or city or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It does seem like, I don't know why, kind of going back to that thing when people talk about the parochial nature of government in Vermont. I always ask people, why do you let the King of England run your government? I said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, he's the one, not the king, obviously, but he was the one in charge of everything. Somebody of English descent, Governor Benning, I guess,
Drew of New Hampshire.
Yes,
right?
yeah, drew the boxes on the map, and there's a lot of weird things. Like everybody admits, if you're drawing a map in Dorset, you wouldn't draw this box here because you got the mountain that runs right through the middle of it. Would have been made more sense to actually have two communities that ran north-south that were Manchester and Dorset, and you have a town that's more rectangular running north-south, especially in the old-fashioned days. And then you've got that odd area of Dorset that used to be part of Peru, but they couldn't go up to Peru town meeting back in the old-fashioned days. The part of East Dorset that sticks out used to be part of Peru. And they said, listen, we don't know anybody in the actual town of Peru. Our neighbors are East Dorset.
Nor can we
So
get there.
nor can we get there, so they moved the line over. So there's a lot of things that just don't really make sense.
Well, this is all kind of interesting, John, because I was just up at the leadership conference of the Vermont Council on Rural Development. And this subject of regionalization came up repeatedly in some of the breakout sessions I tripped around to. I think this is going to be something we're going to see a lot more pressure coming forward because of costs. Don was just alluding to with the fire truck. You're going to see, economic pressures and financial pressures building to the point where it's just going to make so much more sense to have a regional fire department, regional rescue squad, regional whatever, because people will be able to afford the individual town structure.
It's not just the trucks, too. It's the volunteers. I mean, we've had, our own fire department has had discussions. I know our former chief said, okay, everybody in the room that's over 60, raise your hand. Everybody over 50. And we're running, our membership is actually pretty good in Manchester compared to, other communities. But the volunteer base is getting older, though, too. The number of guys, I was down in New York City years ago, and there was a fire and the fire truck rolls up, and the guys that got off the truck looked like kids. And the guy in charge, the lieutenant, he couldn't have been 25 years old. And that's where usually, firefighting is generally a young guy's game, especially when you're talking about interior guys.
Sure.
And I think you're running out of you're running out of not only volunteers, but you're running out of employers too that are willing to let them leave in the middle of the day.
Sure.
But I think if you brought county government up right now, John mentioned the court system. We also have the sheriff system, and that has not done very well in the last couple of years.
Right.
And it's been some people feel it's been abused and so forth. And maybe solid waste is getting to be possibly a county thing, but the thing is, it's going to have to happen. Now, you did try it. Manchester and Manchester Village hired a consultant back in 1975, 76.
Yes, yep.
And that got more publicity than the taking over of Hildene by the Christian Science Church. And Hank Lambert was the manager. Willie was the town manager.
If you read the study, a lot of the points that they make are still germane today.
Yeah, they are.
We've talked to the village about some kind of consolidation. I think there's a couple things. One, they've got different infrastructure needs. The marble sidewalks are really important to the village. And then I think also, if you were to do anything, you'd have to have your own zoning boards. Because I think that the zoning in the village is different. And I think that having more local control, when I say local, I mean micro local control of that, I think would be really important in any discussion. But, right there, we've got, New York City has one highway department. We have two in Manchester town. So when you look at it like that.
And you got a big chunk of the village that's tax exempt.
Yes.
With PBA and Hildene. And what else is in there?
This is the Art Center.
Right?
Yep.
So, well, I don't know. You want to go into...
Yeah, I think we should probably transition on into our housing discussion that we originally invited you to come down here for. And thanks again for making the time for that too, John. I really appreciate it. And good luck at the new job.
Oh, thanks.
It's going It'd be hard to imagine town hall without you there.
Thank you.
But anyway, I guess I just thought maybe just to get our conversation started here, and since I'm going to try and look at this through the lens of civil discourse, I'm sure we're going to bring up some nitty-gritty details about housing and zoning and all the other aspects of it. But I mean, one of the things that often strikes me about housing, in addition to the fact that, as you mentioned a moment ago, there's a shortage of it, and whoever your new successor is, if not already here, is going to go through that little hoop to get through. But it's often struck me that it's really unfortunate, I guess is one word that comes to mind, that people who are currently living in what you would describe as sort of decent, middle-class kind of neighborhoods are really unexcited when it comes to the prospect of having new neighbors moving in nearby within view in a, which we might call affordable or workforce or missing middle type of housing. I guess it's to put it in shorthand, YIMBY versus NIMBY kind of thing, where not in my backyard meets yes in my backyard. There might be a handful of people say, well, hey, we got here, but just because we were here doesn't mean the gangplank gets pulled up behind us. But it seems like very frequently, and in all kinds of neighborhoods, and it's irrespective of the politics. I mean, you can see this in liberal Democratic neighborhoods and conservative Republican ones, where the people who are already there really kind of like it just the way it is, and we don't need to change it. And I guess I just wanted to ask you why you thought that was so. Do you have any thoughts on that? And how do we get past it?
The first thing is, I mean, I think we all realize that change is hard. And I think that's the biggest piece is that, nobody wants to look out their window and look at something different. There's no upside to them. And I think we need to get past that. I think we have to look at these sorts of things from more of a community-wide stance. And you're right. We've run into it where people have proposed any kind of housing, actually, not just affordable and workforce, but any sort of housing. And they always say, well, it's a great project, but it's the wrong site.
I don't mind affordable housing, but just not right here.
Yes. It's kind of, you know what? I guess there's probably a take on an old joke. What do solar panels and housing have in common? And it's probably that nobody wants them in their backyard. That everybody likes solar panels, but they don't want to actually look at them. And that's like, we have some solar panels in Manchester that's in an old gravel pit. And it's the only site I've ever seen because you can't see them from anywhere. And housing just isn't. You can't put housing in locations like that. And I think
I think it's deeper than that. I think it's flat out just don't want the housing, regardless of where you put it. I mean, I've been in the housing business for a long, long time. And when we did work in Manchester, down at Ormsby, initially Ormsby was designed for 68 units. All right, there's 68 acres, and the zoning was 1 unit per acre. And I was involved in it when I was an advisor to Hildene before I even came up here full time to help Hildene out. Hildene was concerned about it, and I got Eagle Development to cut it back to 34. Right. So in 1988, they started the development, and they were given approval to go 34 houses. Unfortunately, that real estate crisis hit. They went broke. The project was dormant for 5 years. During that 5-year period, that development, which was site plan approved with Manchester and Act 250 for 34 homes, when we bought it from the bank, we were cut back to 21 homes. The reason for it is the town passed a zoning or passed another requirement that you could not build on steep slopes, slopes over 8%. You couldn't count it for density. You couldn't count it for density.
Yes, yeah.
And so therefore we were cut back. And then there was an outcry. This job's going to have a lot of kids. We don't want kids. We don't need kids in the school system.
Yeah, we've heard that a lot.
And obviously we were saying, the pricing of this housing is not going to be available for people who have kids in the school. we overcame all that. But my point was, here's a development that started out at 68 units, wound up at 21. Not one of them at the time when we finished selling them was a local Manchester resident. I take that back. Don Bird owned the inn at Ormsby Hill.
But I think you kind of hit on a mark there too, that one thing that people are worried about with housing is who's moving in.
Yeah.
You hear this a lot, and there's a lot of, it's subtle. It's subtle, but like kids, like, I think that, when, one of the big problems in Vermont is our school population is dwindling. We got the same number of schools generally, but the population has plummeted. Or anytime you talk about, we've got a couple different definitions. So, there's affordable housing, which is usually in a government program. And then we have a workforce definition that goes up to about 250% of county median income. And then you got the market units. But even when you talk about workforce housing, people are concerned about, okay, who's going to move in? And it's almost like there's almost this idea that they want to be able to vet who's moving into the neighborhood. I think there is a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And I think that, I don't think it's right, but I think it's probably a natural reaction though too, because it comes back to the change factor.
I suppose it's also taps into a concern that existing homeowners have, that a lot of their wealth and their financial resources are tied into their house. I mean, that's where a big chunk of their estate, if you will, is placed. And if we have some neighbors that are kind of maybe not quite as nice as we are, that diminishes the value of their home, their property value, and therefore their overall wealth.
I mean, it's not the, when we first moved here, we rented a house on 2 Cal Lane, and Blanchard Stone had been deceased, but his wife was living on the house right on the corner there. I was walking down the road, and she calls me over and she says, "I can hear kids back there. Are those your kids?" And I thought, "Oh no." And I said, yeah, they are. She goes, "Oh, I just love to hear their darling little voices." I was like, "Oh, thank God." But I think there's a lot of folks, she was probably in her 90s at the time. There's a lot of folks that probably didn't want that in their neighborhood.
When I started out in the late 60s in housing, building housing, thousands of them with my other company, it was the neighborhoods were worried about race. That was a big issue. And even banks did, and they used to call it redlining. We're not going to lend money in this area and whatever. That's all gone for the most part. The issue today is economic and education. And then there was an article in the New York Times not too long ago about people worrying about, is my neighbor as educated as I am, or is my neighbor as wealthy as I am, regardless of the race or any country they might be from. And we noticed this when we built in Chatham, New Jersey. We built affordable housing under what you may know as a town administrator, the Mount Laurel decision. The Mount Laurel decision in New Jersey is where the Supreme Court said every town has to have housing for its local people who work in the fire department, police department, schools, town government. And so we were doing 700 units in Chatham. I got the zoning was there. But the Mount Laurel decision came down. The Supreme Court said, we're going to increase that to 900 units, of which 50 will be for people who work in the government of the town. And if you can't find enough people in that town of Chatham, you go to Berkeley Heights, Summit, Morristown, and so forth. And you draw their government employees. So people who work in a town can live in a town. And I'm sure right now, most of the people who work in Manchester cannot afford to live in Manchester unless they've been.
If you look at town employees, so for example, the police department, which is a really important department, those are the people that you want living in your neighborhood, just like the rest of the people that work for town government. None of them live in town. I have 9 full-time officers and 4 dispatchers. At town hall, we've got one of the people that's the assistant to the assessor in the planning office lives in town. I live in town. The town clerk lives in town. That's it. And it comes down to, our employees tell us, it comes down to affordability.
Now getting back to the Mount Laurel. So when we built a 16-unit building, and that unit that you bought, because you're a town employee, you would get it for 1/3 the price that Andrew, who would buy at market.
Oh, wow.
You get 1/3, and you have to sell it back to the housing group and so forth. You couldn't make, speculate.
Yep.
But the thing is, you were on the same floor, same porch, and your neighbor Andrew, who was a hedge fund trader,
Mm-hmm.
and you were a policeman or a fireman or a postman or whatever, and it was fine to get them housing, but the thing is, there was a social drought there. They just didn't mix. It was very uncomfortable.
It's interesting because we've talked about housing in the downtown core. We're looking at Depot Street. We're looking at other sites there as well. And the mix that we've kind of come up with, the committee that's working on it has come up with this half and half. Half of the units affordable in workforce, and half of them market. And we really feel like, especially if it was a building with multiple stories, that you don't want to have one floor that's the affordable and then the second floor be market rate units. We are trying to blend all the different models together. And I'm not sure it would be quite the same as what you're talking about, where you'd have a hedge fund person. Like I was saying, our workforce housing model, which gives you incentives, there's no funding for it, but it gives you a lot of density incentives. That goes up to about $140,000 a year. And there's a whole discussion that we had with the Planning Commission when they were talking about what's that threshold. And they were going to go with, I think it was 125% of county median income, which would have been about $70,000. In our argument, the staff argument at the time was, my mother was a teacher, my father was a prison ward, and my grandfather was a cop. And I always kind of view police officers and teachers and firefighters as sort of that, like, no one argues that these are people that go into the business to make a lot of money. They're solidly middle income jobs. And I kind of feel like if you can't accommodate those people in your workforce standards, somebody who's a teacher married to a police officer or a firefighter that can afford a house at a reasonable price in your community, that's sort of something that's really important, to have that sort of accessibility.
Well, take that. Take a state trooper.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting is 58,000. After probation, they can go to 62.
Mm-hmm.
Once they get through the school and are working for 6 months, they can go to 62,000. And a teacher may get 50,000.
Yep.
Right. So that's 110, 120.
Mm-hmm.
And before you came here, I was just doing the math. On a $300,000 house with a 10% down payment,
Mm-hmm.
that family would need $105,000 to carry that house.
Yep.
That $300,000 house, assuming they have no college debt that they're
Mm-hmm.
paying off, and no automobile debt.
Yeah.
That's beyond the year.
Yeah.
Any debt beyond a year.
Yep.
Because that payment would be a lot higher.
Mm-hmm.
What can you get for $300,000?
Right now, nothing. Right now, nothing. We used to say $325, you get a 2 or 3 bedroom ranch that needs a lot of work. But right now, we're seeing stuff that, cash only, way over even asking.
And I've asked some of your builders in Manchester, some of you, they're really top of the line builders.
Mm-hmm.
And they were saying, we won't touch anything for less than $500 a square foot.
Mm.
So I'll do the math, it's a lot easier. A 1,000 square foot apartment or house, which is not really practical.
500,000.
It's 500,000.
Yeah.
I mean,
and then you got $300,000 income to get into that.
No, 105.
No, 105 to get into.
Yeah.
So you would need
You're not there.
225.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there to afford. Just 1,000 square feet is not living high on the hog.
Oh no! I mean, I know
pretty modest.
some people are creating some real efficient units and all that, but here again, it's the numbers aren't panning out from the buyers for the buyers. And I was talking to Andrew, and I'll share with you or ask you to comment on it. A year ago we had a housing conference in Arlington.
Mm-hmm.
State officials came down, county officials, people from regional planning.
Mm-hmm.
And so forth. I don't know whether you were at it. It was in October at the Arlington.
Oh yeah.
Oh, you were there.
That was obviously not very memorable.
Sorry about that.
Made sense.
You see why he's leaving the area?
Yeah, I know.
Nobody listens to him.
But my point, John, is that not one house
Mhm.
has been built in Arlington since that conference, and yet we need so many. And then we have by the way, we have 11 troopers, police, and sheriff people living in
Mhm.
Arlington.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of this unless we address the needs of the government, the needs of the developer, and the needs of the buyer. All three have to be taken into consideration, and it's just getting more complicated. And my suggestion would be the government should designate a site that's ready to go. Not, and I was sharing this with Andrew, and I want to hear what your thoughts are. Not just zoning. I mean, here's a site for 100 units.
Mm-hmm.
It's not only zoned, it's got all the infrastructure is in place, or available. The neighbors are willing to accept it. The town is willing to accept it. It has no issues with site views, site clearance, and so forth. No issues with drainage. No issues with anything. A developer come in here, give us either 50 or 30, 40, 50 houses, whatever it is. That has the site ready. Now in the south, in a lot of places we built in the south, the south of the
They're
country,
pre-permitted.
it's pre-permitted.
Oh yeah, there's even a sign that says, like right on the site, it says pre-permitted for 30 houses or whatever the number is.
You come in and you got to build what you said you're going to do.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
otherwise you don't get to use it, and
Yeah.
now you got yourself a huge investment sitting there and you can't use it. Why can't government? You're on the government side. Why can't government provide that?
Well, we've done some things in Manchester that actually predated the conference. We've totally changed all of our zoning bylaws. So like my neighborhood, for example, used to be 2-acre zoning. Now it's 1-acre zoning. We've changed height restrictions, density in the downtown area. We've allowed for slope and wetlands to be counted towards density.
Okay.
So the Hornsby Hill issue that you brought up is no longer there.
Let me stop you. Why do you think that was put there? This is
The slope issue?
Yeah.
Was
it in fact to block housing,
probably to block development.
block development?
Yeah, I think that in the past there have been, the same thing with the 3,000 square foot, this 3,000 square foot retail sites downtown that was put in place specifically. I mean, I think that the people that were in charge at the time, the planning commission, was very clear that that's what they wanted. They wanted no growth or limited growth. And I think the tide has turned on that. I think Manchester, through our zoning bylaws, as far as Bennington County and Southern Vermont is concerned, is probably some of the most progressive and most flexible. It's not to say that there's not work still to do. The one thing that recently came up is we have a sewer project that's fully designed going all the way down Main Street. It was going to go all the way down to the Daily Gravel Pit. It was going to pick up the mobile home park, which right now is on private sewer and or private septic and water. I was going to pick up the new hotel, town hall, public safety building, the synagogue, all the hotels along the way, and a lot of land that could be developed. Everything from what Bill Drunzig's building, the 20 some odd units that he's building there, the land across the road that's called the Zoltak parcel that's between North Shore Day School and Vermont Country Store, and then the Sessions property behind North Shore Medical, property in front of Town Hall. So there's a ton of property there that could have been developed. And we even had some preliminary work done where we were going to provide discounts for hookups for what we were calling workforce housing. We defined that by square footage. I think it was going to be less than 2,000 square feet for a single family house and 1,500 for a condo or apartment. So pretty, a pretty high threshold, 2,000 square feet, not counting your basement. But, we didn't try to get into the income approach. But regardless, the environmental folks who are making decisions on the grants turned down the project. And meanwhile, no one can understand why we can't build affordable housing. And I think it's, state agencies that just don't seem to be on the same page. I think if you showed that list to Josh Hanford, the housing commissioner, I think he'd say, oh yeah, that's a good one. But instead, a lot of the money went to parts north of Route 4, otherwise known as Chittenden County. And I think that it's, a real step backwards because some of the costs that, people don't understand is when you're putting in affordable housing, well, first off, you got to set aside a huge leach field. And then you've got the cost of building the leach field, which is always more expensive than the municipal hookup. So that's the one place I always say to Seth Bongartz and Kathy James, the one place the state should be more active is funding the infrastructure to these sites. If you could get, like you were saying, if you could get solid commitments from communities that they were going to use it for affordable housing and they weren't going to put in, 10,000 square feet, 10-bedroom houses.
Well, the Shires building the 22 units down at Lake Parent. That was roughly, that was 2 years ago. That was $322,000 per unit for that kind of housing. And then the same thing was $330 on Silver Street in in Bennington. I think 20 units. I mean, that's affordable housing, and they're not very big units.
We have a similar, pretty similar numbers on the property. That's the units that are behind on Depot Street, behind Green Mountain Vet.
Yeah,
they're pretty similar units. The one thing I like about, I haven't been to the lake. I've seen the Lake Perrin project, and there's a real growing sense that affordable and workforce housing can look really nice.
yeah, it can be.
There's a walking path. It's got access to the lake. I mean, they're good-looking units.
The problem with many times when government, okay, we're gonna satisfy that cry for housing. They'll put it in very undesirable areas.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you're creating a problem. You ask yourself,
Yeah.
Why do we have a slum? Well,
Yep.
I can tell you why. But
You look at there was a lot of unrest in Paris among a lot of the new Muslim immigrants, and they had put them, they had isolated them in these big giant buildings, and really created this kind of sense that like there's the people in Paris, and then there's us that have been thrown in the suburbs, and I think that you can do the development of these projects can create a lot of harm too.
well, we learned that from the 70s with
Yes.
the Pruitt Igoe.
Yeah.
The big project in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
They built it based on the rioting of the 60s, and they built 7,000 units.
Yep.
Only to tear them down in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So 7,000 homes.
Where I was born in Rochester, New York, they had the riots in the 70s, and they ended up building cinder block apartment buildings that had open stairwells, and the mailboxes were out front because they didn't want people breaking into them. They had built them in these ways, and then a lot of times they would build them near National Guard armories.
Let me ask you this question. Setting aside, excuse me, we now have the land and it's all ready to go, pre-permit.
Yep.
Okay, now we have the buyer who's having difficulty coming up with the down payment. But I didn't mention on this example here of a $300,000 home, it takes $50,000 to close that home. If they put down 10%.
Yep.
If they need 20%, obviously it goes up geometrically. But if a buyer and this young school teacher and maybe trooper, they don't have 50,000 saved, would you as the town manager propose, let's create a revolving loan fund for down payments for housing for first-time housing buyer, and have them work through that and provide, if not all of it, a good chunk of the down payment. Would that be something you would?
I don't see why you would. I mean, it would be a secured debt too.
No, it wouldn't.
You see a lot, and I think some communities have these business funds where they'll give businesses seed money, and a lot of times those debts end up costing communities money.
Well, Brandon, I was sharing with Andrew, has I think 80 loans out there. They did a couple $1 million. They only had one bad experience. Bennington has a loan fund.
Yep. For businesses.
They call it revolving loan fund.
Yeah.
Would you recommend that to Manchester if you were still here? I mean,
Well, even as Citizen O'Keefe, I could suggest it. I'll still be at town meeting. I think they'll still let me in. I would. I mean, I think, like I was saying, like it seems like a really, not only does it really create opportunities, because like you were saying, a young couple, most people are relying on the equity from their existing house. So there's always that, how do you scrape together the first amount of money to buy a house? And to me, it seems like it's satisfying that. And again, you'd hold papers on the place. So if they decide to walk away from it, you'd still have the property too. So I don't see why the community wouldn't do it. We've got a couple funds. We've got the CERC fund, for example, that has about $1 million in it. And if it was a revolving fund and people were paying it back, it seems like you could probably even do a very low interest rate too.
You still have the fund from the Equinox?
We call it the CERC fund now, yeah, too. We renamed it. It used to be the UDAG fund.
UDAG, okay.
Yeah, I think you were involved in. Were you involved in that?
Very much.
Yeah. Yeah, we still own the
Way
land
too
too.
involved, but you're right.
We still own the 60 acres that you had negotiated, and that really is coming down to it comes down to once again to water, sewer, and electric. If you can get that back on that site, you've got 60 acres.
Oh, yeah.
The zoning there actually now is it would be absolutely impossible, I think, to build 240 units would be the zoning on that site. That seems like a lot, but that parcel is actually big enough that, and we've started kind of looking at it a little bit where, could you have different neighborhoods on that same parcel? So you'd have maybe some townhouses that you could start out when you were younger, and this is what you were speaking of, that you could actually work your way up. So when you and your wife first got married, it was just the two of you. So you could start out in a townhouse, and then you get one kid, you got to move over, maybe get a little bigger unit, and then next thing you know, you're in a 4-bedroom house because you got 3 or 4 kids bouncing around, and you could work your way up.
Are you familiar with that site?
Yeah.
The 60 acres. So you would be I'm not putting words in your mouth.
Yeah.
In favor of creating a fund to help, because you were mentioning earlier, it's not going to be that easy to hire if the town goes outside and hires your replacement.
Yeah, that's right. If you look at the numbers that my salary is public record. I make $110 a year. So if you're talking about a one income family, and you're looking at that house, they're just barely affording the $300,000 house. And that's the town's most expensive employee. So there's also this reckoning between what we pay our public employees, and it was kind of going back to that one thing I was saying that nobody goes into policing or teaching to get rich. I think that the top school employee is probably about what I make. Not the superintendent, but the principal I think is probably making a little bit over $100,000 a year. And when you drive it through that formula, especially if the person, when I showed up here, I was 35. But I think you'd say relatively young. And if this is the first house, that person's going to struggle to buy something here. And I think it's important, especially you want your town manager to live in the community.
Well, see where we're at. So a town manager making 110 could not afford this house. And this is, by the way, the rates are going up. I had 5.5.
Yes.
30-year mortgage. And, they're going up.
So what do you think is going to be the way that we kind of break through this sort of cultural barrier where the people who are already in the nice neighborhood don't want anything changed, and yet there's this big field out there crossing the other side of the road where it'd be a perfect site for a 30, 40 unit housing project, let's say, and the sewer lines are already there, everything's in place. What arguments are there, or what incentives can be offered to those people to say, hey, look at, this is housing that will be for your kids, basically, when they are old enough to buy a home and are ready to move out of the apartment or whatever. And your attitude is meaning that they're not going to be able to buy a home.
Yeah.
How do we break through that?
That is a tough question. Some of it is through the public meeting process. Some of it is through the quality of design. Like we were talking about, like the Lake Perrin projects, those look really nice. And I think that some of it is you need to build a neighborhood, whether it's affordable or workforce or market, where people could look at and say, you know what, when I'm done with my 3,000 square foot house, I might want to move there. We've kicked around some ideas at the Depot Street site, the site behind J. Crew, and I've looked at it and said, yeah, I'd love to live there. And I think that's part of the trick is building something that people find appealing, maybe not today, but maybe later. And this idea of, I mean, I think if you created a really nice place with a lot of architecture and a lot of different textures and colors and something that just looked really attractive versus if you were to propose, sort of the, it was funny when I went to Prague right after the fall of the Iron Curtain, you'd have these beautiful historic buildings right next to this Soviet style cinder block apartment building. If you're going to put in like a Soviet style cinder block box with windows, I think that people are going to respond, very poorly to it. But of course, the other challenge there is every time, right, we could all go around and look at different houses and say, oh, that's the one. We're always going to pick the most expensive one, right? We all have good taste. So building something, and I think that's where the Shires have really exceeded or excelled recently. They built nice stuff at prices. They could have built those units cheaper, right? The Lake Perrin ones, probably. They could have taken all the materials off the outside.
You know what's very costly with that kind of housing is the legal work to get the tax credits.
Yes, yeah.
It's really almost it's sinful. I mean, what they have to pay to get the tax credits, which is very complicated. And then those houses cannot be built without the tax credits that are given to the lenders who provide the money.
Yeah, I mean, it is right now in this part of the country. It is impossible without some kind of incentives, without some kind of tax credits, without some kind of government subsidy. It is impossible to build housing for regular, normal people who put on their shoes in the morning and go to work. At what you were saying, I mean, I've heard $400 a square foot. Yeah, Peter, that you could build something for that.
Peter will stay away from anything. He said it's $400, and even there, he said I can't guarantee the price. That's the problem. Because why? Because they can't guarantee that and with respect to miles or whatever the lumber companies, they can only hold for less than 30 days. The price and the concrete company, well, in any event.
And I don't see those numbers coming down. I mean, everything goes up so quickly. I don't see them ever returning to, like it used to be. I think what were you paying when you were building places? $150, $200 a square foot?
Oh, less than that.
Oh, yeah.
The other thing I find interesting about all of this is that thinking back to when I was a kid, my father and a bunch of his friends built the house we lived in.
Yeah.
And I know up and down the block in Yonkers where I lived, other dads did the same thing. They brought their friends, their brother-in-law, and all that.
It's almost Amish-like in an urban setting.
I have the impression that almost never happens anymore.
Yeah.
That it's all professional home builders, that do-it-yourselfers, as it were, in part because of the legal zoning and all the other restrictions. But it's
a town. That's interesting you say that, because a number of streets in Yonkers are named after Verrill's family. They were builders down there. There were 12 brothers. I mean, but in any event, why is it that Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, which is opposite Charleston, went from 33,000 residents 20 years ago to almost 100,000 now? And they're having, they just keep building it out. And to me, isn't it really, and this is where the intellectual honesty comes to play, if the town wants the housing, they'll go out and push it and say, look, this company, we want you right here. And going out and marketing, just like you market the rec park. Why isn't the town pushing and being more aggressive in wanting the housing, regardless of what the neighbors say? If this is the site that's zoned, why are we pushing for that?
That's a good question. I don't think we've ever really had. This is the kind of way I look at, so we're about 4,400 people here in Manchester. I don't think we've really ever even had the discussion like, how big do we want to be when we grow up? Like you look at Arlington or Sunderland, like what would be the right number for Sunderland? If you had to say, it's probably more than the current number of 1,000, was it 46 people?
56.
56, sorry. I didn't mean to cheat you out of those 10 people.
Taxpayers, hey, come on.
Well, that's just Damien and Megan. They're the 10 people. So I don't think we've ever had the discussion like, is 6,000 too many? Is 8,000 too many? We don't really even know how big our population is right now, right? We've seen this huge influx of people. But I don't think that we have designated areas. We've looked at areas. We're also looking at more housing downtown. The other piece I think that has changed two baby boomers and a Gen Xer are sitting around talking about what kind of houses the millennials want to live in. I always think that's kind of interesting. Like they look at us and we're just dinosaurs. They're looking for a different kind of house. Like I don't know if you've talked to people that are in their 20s and 30s, older than your kids. They're looking for bike access. So we've been looking at stuff downtown. We've made changes like the bike lanes, but they're not looking for big places. They're much more portable. They're looking for more social space in the building. So they'd probably be more open to a common gym, a common open space where they're going to be down there with their laptops. They're looking at, I think if the communities around here are going to be successful in drawing these new workers, because right now, I mean, the worker in America is a millennial, right? Like if you were going to open a bank, who would you get to work for you? The millennials. You're not going to hire baby boomers or Generation X.
Can I just raise two?
We're really out of time.
Okay.
30 seconds.
For the first time in 34 years, last week I went for my semi-annual physical, and I didn't see a doctor. I saw a nurse practitioner.
Yep.
First time in 34 years. And last week, for 2 days, the bank was closed because no employees.
Wow.
We don't have a problem? Well,
No, we do.
we got a problem.
And the problem is, it is workers too. Like not just houses for people, but also that equates to people actually working in the businesses. And that's where I kind of keep going back to this
We're
millennial place.
We're off the air.
We'll have to call it a day at this point, John,
Okay.
and leave it there. Obviously, this is a fascinating subject. We could probably talk for another hour or so about
more than that.
various aspects to it, but we'll leave it there for now. And I want to thank all of you who've been watching, and hope you've found our program interesting. And we'll see you again the next time on Civil Discussion. Meanwhile, have a great day.